My name is Naomi Reeves. I am 32 years old, and after a decade of designing buildings for other people, I have learned this. A structure never announces its weaknesses on a clear day. It waits for rain, for wind, for the kind of pressure that finds every place where the foundation was poured too thin. 2 years ago, my family disowned me for marrying a black man. On a Tuesday evening in June, with the gutters overflowing outside my front door, my mother stood on my porch and asked me to save them. I wish I could say I felt triumph. I had imagined this moment more than once, in the quiet hours after losing them. My father's voice on the phone. Finally softened. Finally sorry. But what I felt instead, watching my mother's mascara run in gray lines down a face I used to know better than my own, was something closer to grief. Grief for the years we could have had. Grief that it took ruin to bring her to my door. Naomi. Her voice cracked on the second syllable of my name, like she'd forgotten how to say it gently. Please, just 5 minutes. I should tell you who I am before I tell you what happened next, because the woman standing in that doorway, deciding whether to let her own mother in out of the rain, was not the same girl who used to set the table every Sunday at the house on Trad Street and wait for her father's approval like it was oxygen. I am an architect. I design homes, places where families are meant to feel safe inside walls I draw before they exist. There is a phrase we use in the trade, load-bearing. It means a wall that, if removed, takes the rest of the building down with it. For most of my life, I believed my family was load-bearing for me. I have since learned the difference between a wall that holds you up and a wall that simply blocks your view of the door. I stepped aside and let her in. She sat at my kitchen table, the one Malcolm built from reclaimed heart pine the year we got married, when we had more love than money, and she held her purse in her lap like a shield. I made tea because my hands needed something to do. Behind me, I heard the garage door lift. Malcolm was home. He paused in the doorway when he saw her. To his credit, he didn't say anything cruel, though he would have been entitled to. He simply looked at me, a question in his eyes, and I gave him the smallest nod, the one that meant, I've got this, but stay close. He set his keys down quietly and leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching my mother the way you watch weather that might turn. Your father's company is failing, she said finally, staring into her cup instead of at me. Carter Construction. 31 years, Naomi. It's going to be gone by Christmas if something doesn't change. I felt nothing move in my chest. I want to be honest about that, because this is not a story about a woman who forgot how to feel. It is a story about a woman who finally learned where to put her feelings so they wouldn't be used against her. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I meant it. The way you mean it for any stranger's misfortune. But I don't see what that has to do with me. My mother's hands tightened around the mug. There's a project, the Whitfield development, on the peninsula. Banks pulled the financing after a permitting dispute. Your father needs someone with your name in the industry to vouch for the firm, a credible architect to co-sign the new plans, to get the city to reconsider. She finally looked up. He needs you. He needs you. Not we miss you. Not we were wrong. I let the silence sit there long enough that she had to hear it too. 2 years ago, I said, Dad stood in the foyer of that house and told me I had until midnight to choose between this family and Malcolm. Do you remember what you did while he said that? My mother's eyes dropped to the table. You poured yourself a second glass of wine and went upstairs. To understand why her tears didn't move me the way they once would have, you have to go back to the night I introduced them to the man I loved, because that night didn't just end a relationship between my father and me. It built the woman who could sit across from her own mother's grief and still pour the tea calmly without spilling a drop. It was the Sunday after Thanksgiving, 2 years and 4 months before that rainy night in my kitchen. I had asked Malcolm to come to dinner because I was tired of hiding him, tired of editing my weekends, tired of saying a friend from work when my mother asked who I'd been spending time with. We had been together 14 months by then. He had already met my best friend, my college roommate, even my grandmother in Beaufort, who adored him because he fixed her porch light without being asked. I thought, foolishly, that love this steady would simply be recognized as what it was. My father, Walter Carter, built Carter Construction Group from a single excavator and a line of credit in 1991. He is a man who measures respect in handshakes and golf invitations, who believes the Carter name means something on the peninsula because he has spent 3 decades making sure it does. He stood at the head of the table that night in his shirt sleeves, carving a ham he hadn't yet realized would be the last meal he ever served me in that house. I remember the silence after I said, "Dad, Mom, this is Malcolm. He's been a very important part of my life, and I wanted you both to finally meet him properly." My sister Vanessa laughed first, a short, surprised sound she tried to disguise as a cough. My mother's smile didn't move, the way a photograph doesn't move, fixed and a little too bright. My father set down the carving knife with the precision of a man setting down something he wanted very badly to throw. "Naomi," he said. A word. Kitchen. I followed him because some part of me, even then, still believed obedience would buy me a conversation instead of a verdict. He shut the door behind us. "What exactly is this?" he said, not as a question. "His name is Malcolm Reeves. He's a structural engineer. I love him. You brought him into my house. I brought him to dinner, Dad. To meet my family." He looked at me the way you look at a stranger who has wandered into the wrong house, confused about how I had become someone he didn't recognize. "Do you understand what people will say? What this does to everything I've built? I have clients on that peninsula who would not shake that man's hand at a job site, let alone at my daughter's wedding. Then those clients can find another contractor." What he said next, I will not repeat in his exact words. He chose them carefully, the way a man chooses a tool he knows will do damage, and I have decided I will not give those particular words a second life by writing them here. I will tell you only that they were ugly and old and worn smooth from years of private use in rooms he thought I'd never enter. I will tell you that I stood very still while he said them, the way you stand still when you realize the floor beneath you was never as solid as you believed. "You have until midnight," he said finally, his voice gone cold and businesslike, the voice he used on subcontractors who disappointed him. "Choose this family, or choose him. I won't have my name attached to that decision." I walked back into the dining room. Malcolm stood when he saw my face. He didn't need words to know. Vanessa wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother sat very still, her wine glass already refilled, and said nothing at all. Not a word in my defense. Not even a question. I have thought about that silence more than I've thought about my father's words, in the 2 years since. Cruelty, I could file away as a flaw in a flawed man. But silence from the person who taught me how to set a table, how to write a thank you note, how to be good, that took longer to forgive, and some days I still haven't managed it. "I choose Malcolm," I said, and I picked up my coat, and I left the house on Trad Street for what I believed, at the time, would be the last time in my life. I was wrong about that, but I was right about almost everything else. My mother set down her tea and reached into her purse, and for a moment I thought she might produce tissues, or a photograph, or some small olive branch she'd rehearsed on the drive over. Instead, she pulled out a folded sheet of paper, soft at the creases from being opened and closed too many times. "There's something else," she said. "Something about a loan, with your name on it." The kitchen seemed to tilt very slightly, the way a building does when you stand on a floor that isn't quite level and your body knows before your mind does. "What loan?" "I don't fully understand it myself. Your father handles all of that." but the bank mentioned a guarantee. Your name, your signature, on the original financing for the company's expansion. Years ago, before, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I have never signed anything for Carter Construction in my life, I said. My mother's eyes slid away from mine, toward the window, toward anywhere that wasn't my face. Ask your father, she said quietly, and I understood in that moment that she had come not only to beg, but to warn me of something she didn't have the courage to say plainly. Malcolm drove her home that night. I didn't ask him to. He simply picked up his keys, because that is the kind of man he is, the kind who will extend grace to people who never extended it to him, not because they deserve it, but because cruelty has never once made him smaller. I sat alone at the heart pine table after he left and stared at the place where my mother's folded paper had been, and I let myself remember, properly, for the first time in 2 years, everything that came after that Sunday dinner. The disownment did not end with my father's ultimatum. That would have been almost merciful. A clean break, a single wound instead of 1,000 small ones. Instead, what followed was a campaign, quiet and deniable, the kind a man like my father has spent 30 years perfecting in boardrooms. Within a month, 2 of my architecture clients, a young couple renovating a Victorian on Rutledge Avenue, and a restaurant group I'd been courting for nearly a year, called to cancel their contracts, citing vague concerns about professionalism that neither could quite explain when I pressed them. It took me 3 weeks to learn, through a colleague who still spoke to me, that my father had played golf with both of their attorneys. He never said a word against me directly. He didn't have to. A raised eyebrow, a slow shake of the head, a murmured, "Well, you know how she's chosen to live now." That was all it took, in a city as small as ours, for doors to close softly and without explanation. Vanessa was less subtle. My sister had always measured her worth against mine the way some people measure a room before they've decided to live in it, carefully, competitively, looking for where she came up short. She found, in my disownment, an opportunity she had perhaps been waiting for her whole life. She told mutual friends I had abandoned the family for attention. She told my grandmother, who was too frail by then to call and ask me herself, that Malcolm had pressured me into cutting off contact, when the truth was the opposite. It was Malcolm, every single time, who encouraged me to call home, to try again, to leave the door open even when no one on the other side seemed interested in walking through it. We lost the support that had once cushioned every hard decision in my life, the kind a family with means simply assumes will always be there. No help with a down payment. No safety net beneath the leap of starting my own practice. Malcolm and I bought a half-collapsed bungalow on the edge of town, the only thing we could afford, and we rebuilt it ourselves on weekends, board by board, while I built my client list one referral at a time, the slow way, the honest way. I remember the night we tore out the old kitchen wall and found, behind the plaster, a support beam someone had cut through decades earlier without ever replacing it properly. The house had been standing on faith and luck for 40 years. We fixed it. We always fixed it ourselves, because no one was coming to fix it for us. I tell you all of this not for sympathy, but because it matters for what came next. Because the woman who sat at that kitchen table 2 years later, holding her mother's folded paper, was not someone who had spent those years waiting by the phone. I had built something. I had built it without them, on purpose, brick by brick, the way you build anything that needs to actually hold weight. The morning after my mother's visit, I called Priya Anand, a friend from law school days who now practiced commercial litigation 2 floors above my own office downtown. I didn't tell her everything. Not yet. I only asked her to pull whatever public filings existed on Carter Construction Group, and to check, quietly, whether my name appeared on any financial documents tied to the company. She called back 4 hours later, and her voice had the careful flatness of someone delivering bad news to a friend. Naomi, there's a personal guarantee on file with First Coastal Bank, dated 9 years ago. $240,000, securing an equipment loan for the company's expansion into the Whitfield corridor. She paused. Your name is on it. Your signature. Your social security number. You would have been 23. I was 23 9 years ago. I was also at the time 3,000 miles away, finishing a graduate program in Oregon, a fact I could prove with transcripts, plane tickets, and a roommate who would remember exactly where I was that semester. I had never seen the document Priya was describing. I had certainly never signed it. Someone forged it, I said, and the words came out steadier than I expected. The calm, even voice I had learned to keep no matter what the structural inspection revealed. My father forged my signature on a $250,000 loan. That's a felony, Naomi. In this state, that's not a family dispute. That's fraud. I thought about my mother's face the night before. The way she hadn't said forged, hadn't said fraud, had only said ask your father, as though handing me the problem unwrapped and letting me discover the shape of it myself was somehow gentler than saying it plainly. I understood then why they had really come. Not for forgiveness, not even truly for help with a permitting dispute. The bank's note had finally come due. The company couldn't cover it. And the only person legally bound to that $240,000 debt who still had clean credit and a stable income was me. They hadn't come to my door because they missed their daughter. They had come because 9 years ago, my father had quietly made me his insurance policy, and now the policy was being called in. I need everything, I told Priya. The original loan application, the notary records, all of it. What are you going to do? I looked out my kitchen window at the bungalow Malcolm and I had rebuilt with our own hands, at the new beam we had installed ourselves where the old one had silently failed for 40 years, and I thought about how long a structure can stand on a flaw before someone finally has to find it and name it out loud. I'm going to find out exactly how deep this goes, I said, and then I'm going to make my father tell the truth, in front of everyone, for the first time in his life. Priya found what she needed within a week. The notary who had stamped the loan guarantee 9 years ago had retired to Hilton Head and, after a polite but pointed phone call, admitted, off the record at first, then on it. Once Priya explained what a felony forgery charge would mean for his own license, that he had notarized the signature at my father's office, in my father's presence without ever laying eyes on me. He had been a fishing buddy of my father's for 20 years. He had done it, he said, as a favor. He hadn't thought of it as a crime. Men like my father rarely let the men around them think of it that way. I asked Priya to draft 2 things: a formal letter to First Coastal Bank disputing the guarantee on the grounds of forgery, supported by the notary's statement, and my own documented whereabouts at the time, and an invitation. Not a subpoena, an invitation addressed to my father, asking him to meet me at Priya's office on Friday morning to discuss a matter concerning Carter Construction's financing. I wanted him to walk in believing he still held the leverage. I wanted him to understand, in the same room and at the same moment, exactly how much of it he had already lost. He arrived in his good suit, the one he wore to closings, with my mother trailing a half step behind him the way she always had. Vanessa came too, uninvited, arms crossed, already prepared to be offended on principle. I sat at the head of the conference table, a position I had chosen on purpose, the way you choose where to stand when you want a room to remember who was speaking. I assume this is about the Whitfield financing, my father said, before he'd even taken his seat. I'm glad you've come around, Naomi. I'll need your firm's letterhead on the... It's about a loan guarantee from 9 years ago, I said. $240,000. My signature. Notarized by Hal Ferris, who has now confirmed, in writing, that I was never in the room when he stamped it. The silence that followed was different from the silence at that long-ago Sunday dinner. That one had been the silence of a man certain of his own power. This one had the particular quality of a man watching the ground open beneath a structure he had assumed would hold forever. "You don't understand the position the company was in," he said finally, and his voice had lost its boardroom register. "The expansion needed collateral. You had no debt, no liabilities, the cleanest credit in the family. You forged my name on a felony fraud charge because my credit was convenient," I said. "And then, 4 months later, you told me to choose between this family and the man I loved, knowing the whole time you'd already chosen for me. You'd already decided what I was worth to you, and it wasn't a daughter. It was collateral." My mother made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob, and I watched something shift in her face. Not surprise, exactly. Recognition. As though some part of her had suspected this for years and had simply never let herself look at it directly. "Walter," she said, very quietly, "is this true?" He didn't answer her. He looked at me instead, and for the first time in 2 years, I watched my father search for words and find none waiting for him. "The bank has already received formal notice disputing the guarantee," I said. "Hal Ferris is prepared to give a sworn statement. I am not interested in destroying you, Dad, despite what you might believe about who I've become. But I will not spend one more day as collateral for a man who threw me out of his life and then quietly kept me on the books in case he ever needed me again. You have two options. You disclose the forgery to the bank yourself and work out a restructuring on the actual facts. Or I let Priya file the fraud complaint, and the bank does it for you, publicly, and you can explain to every client on that peninsula exactly why your daughter's signature appears on a loan she never saw." He left without another word, which told me everything I needed to know about which option Pride would choose. Vanessa followed him out, throwing me a look I couldn't quite read. Something between fury and, unexpectedly, the faintest flicker of shame. My mother stayed. Carter Construction Group did not survive. The Whitfield project collapsed within the month. The bank called the remaining notes, and my father sold what was left of the company's equipment at auction to settle what he could. I won't pretend I felt nothing watching 31 years of his life dissolve into a spreadsheet of liquidated assets. Grief is rarely as clean as the people who haven't felt it imagine it to be. But I felt no guilt. A house built on a beam someone secretly cut through will fall eventually, no matter how long the rot stays hidden behind the plaster. I had not cut that beam. I had only finally turned on the light. My mother began calling once a week, then twice, careful and unhurried calls that asked for nothing and demanded nothing. The kind of calls that slowly started to feel less like negotiations and more like a mother actually wanting to know her daughter's life. I let her in by degrees: Sunday coffee, then a dinner with Malcolm where she complimented his renovation work on our bungalow without flinching. Then, eventually, a holiday where she sat at our heart pine table and didn't once mention Trad Street. I never spoke to my father again in any meaningful way. He sent one letter, brief and unapologetic in the particular manner of men who mistake an admission of fact for an apology. I did what I thought the business required, and I understood that some structures, once their flaws are exposed, are simply never going to be rebuilt the way you might have once hoped. That is its own kind of grief, too. I have made peace with it the way I make peace with any design that didn't survive the inspection. I learned what I could, and I moved forward with better materials. Vanessa and I are not close, but she called me, once, late on a weeknight, and said only, "I should have said something that night at dinner. I think about it more than you'd probably believe." I told her I believed her. I didn't tell her it changed anything, because it didn't. Not really. But I think she already knew that, and called anyway, because some apologies are owed regardless of whether they're enough. I think often, these days, about the difference between a wall that holds you up and a wall that only ever blocked your view of the door. My father built an entire career on being load-bearing, on being the man everyone in his world depended on, the one without whom things were certain to collapse. It took me 30 years to understand that I had never needed him to hold me up at all. I had needed him to simply not be the reason I had to learn how. Malcolm still has the strip of reclaimed heart pine left over from our kitchen table, sanded smooth, sitting in our garage. He says he's saving it for whatever we build next. I think that's the truest thing anyone in this story ever said to me, that you don't need the old foundation to keep building. You only need good wood, steady hands, and someone willing to stand beside you while you measure twice and cut once. My mother visits most Sundays now. We do not talk about my father. We talk about the garden, about Malcolm's promotion, about the nursery we're slowly putting together in the room that used to be my office. Some walls, it turns out, can still be rebuilt, just not on the same ground and never by pretending the crack was never there.